So I know all of you come to this YouTube channel for some hot takes and some really intelligent, hard-hitting analysis, so how's this for hard-hitting analysis? The Miami Dolphins are a bad football team. Okay, I get it. I'm not exactly going out on a limb here, but the reality is, this is one of the worst teams we've seen in quite some time. It is definitely a very bad team, and really does have a chance to go 0-16. Granted, it's just hard to go 0-16 in the NFL. The chances are you'll play a team bad enough that you'll find a way to pick up a win, or just a team that plays poor, makes some mistakes. You can keep it close and make sure you actually get a win. This week could have ended up being their best chance. I mean, they also played the Bengals in their 15th game of the season, so that could also potentially determine who gets the first overall pick even. And I know they just almost beat the Redskins, but make no mistake about it, this is a bad football team. I could just say they're bad and leave it at that. I mean, not too many people care about why they're bad, but I find it interesting to actually break down what's going wrong. Why are they such a poor team? And honestly, it all starts with the offensive line. Pro Football Focus rated the Miami Dolphins offensive line as the worst in the league before they got rid of Laramie Tunsil. So clearly they're not the best, and they have not been playing too well in 2019, and so let's just jump into some poor plays. Because, well, honestly, okay, your offensive line isn't great, but that happens, every team has a weakness. For the Dolphins, it's their offensive line, that's their weakness. But they're also not really doing themselves any favors, largely due to failure to communicate on several plays. Like on this one, it's going to be a play action to the right side of the screen, and then for Miami, they have two guys who are going to keep an eye on that Redskins edge rusher right over there. However, their right guard will also be aware of just anybody else who could potentially be in the area. Like as you see right when this ball is snapped, first off, Matt Ioannidis, he is getting covered up here by both of those two Miami players, so this now means that there really isn't too much you think he could do here. Now granted, Miami's right guard here in this play, Evan Boehm, he actually does have a different idea of what he should do on this play. He simply just looks up and realizes that there is a Redskins linebacker who could potentially be blitzing on this play, and if he is, he has a straight shot to Rosen, so that could be bad news. And so, it's not a terrible idea to make sure that he is getting blocked and moving up to block him. However, if that's something you are willing to do, then you and your right tackle both have to be on the same page here. However, clearly they're not both on the same page. Miami's right tackle is clearly okay with that Redskin getting closer to the inside because he feels like he has help with the guard who's in that area. However, he doesn't because the guard is going to move up to block a linebacker who also isn't even blitzing on this play. So because of that, it allows a Redskin to get completely free and hit Rosen before he has a chance to do anything. I mean, you can't blame Rosen for that one at all. I mean, what's he supposed to do here? He got sacked pretty much the second that play developed, so you can't blame him. That's just really more bad communication than anything else by Miami. It's one thing to just make poor plays. I mean, that will happen. You don't have too talented of a line. But when you have a poor line that also just isn't playing smart, well, that's how you create disasters. Like, there's also this one where really what I want you to keep an eye on is the right side of the screen, as there are 4 Washington players who could potentially be rushing the passer here. However, only 3 of them will, and that Redskin will be dropping back into coverage. And also worth mentioning on display, there is a tight end in the game for Miami, but he's going to be running up. So really, there's only 3 players who could potentially be making a block here for Miami. It's their center, their left guard, and their left tackle. And for Washington, that's actually a great situation. I mean, they have a player who can run just straight into the tackle, and then you'll have just a clear shot to Rosen right over the top. I mean, that's pretty much a dream situation for the Redskins. And so if you're Miami, well, what should you do in this situation? First off, you have to read that this could potentially be a blitz. I mean, there are, as of right now, 6 guys who are in position where they could potentially be rushing the passer. First off, Rosen should just be smart here, and honestly, he should say, hey, if you see that edge rusher on the right side of the screen is blitzing, well then you make sure that you block him, don't worry about running your route. That's just something that you could do. Oftentimes you'll do that with a halfback, but since there's no halfback in on this play, I would recommend doing that to your tight end, or just getting a halfback to come back into the backfield. But since he didn't do that, it is going to create some problems. Like, take a look what happens right when this ball is snapped. Miami's center is actually kind of reading this play pretty well. I think he realized at this point, okay, there's a clear problem. I have to get over and block that Redskin because if I don't, nobody will. It's actually not a terrible idea, but there is a problem with it. And their problem is, look at their left guard right here. He is not blocking that Redskin right over there. He's trying to pass him off to the center. But since your center is moving over to block an edge rusher, this now means that once again, it's just a straight shot to Rosen. It's easy to give up sacks against a good defensive line when you're not a great offensive line, but this isn't even just bad talent. This is just bad coaching and bad awareness by these players. When it comes to talent, you can only control what you can control, but at least with some of these plays, you would expect them to not have those disasters. Because you're also going to just get straight up beat. Like, if you take a look at this play, there is going to be a one-on-one matchup. It's going to be the left guard against a defensive tackle right there. The left guard being Michael Dieter for Miami, and then for Washington, it'll be Trayvon Hester, who's going up one-on-one against him. He's essentially just going to brush to the right side of the screen, and look at how easily he's able to pull that off. Just a quick move, and now there's no contact. So at this point, if you're an offensive lineman, what can you do here? Well, not a lot, but it's not over. It's admittedly not a great situation either. You do have some problems right here, but there are things you can do, and one thing that I would recommend to do is just put your hands on him and try to push him around to where Rosen can at least run to the left side of the screen and give himself some more time. The pocket has definitely closed up, but you can at least create a situation where he's not going to get hit just immediately. And so that's what he's going to do. I mean, if you notice, he gets pretty solid hand placement. That's actually what you want, because now all you can do is just push him to the right side of the screen. Rosen can realize this, run to the left side of the screen a little bit. Again, it's not a great situation, but at least you're kind of coming back from what was a terrible situation. So, not a great situation, but at least not the end of the world. However, now, this is just going to be a talent thing. I mean, look at how Hester is just able to be so strong and just overpower him and get to the quarterback. But it also should be mentioned that it's not like Trayvon Hester is some all-pro level guy. I mean, quite the opposite. He's played on 3 teams in 3 different years. He was a former 7th overall pick, and that's only his 2nd career sack. So the fact that they're making career role players look like dominant players out there, I think really does go to show just the lack of talent this Miami Dolphins team has, especially on their offensive side of the ball. Their defense isn't great either, but I only have time to cover one thing on this video. Maybe I'll make a video of their defense in the future. Probably not, but maybe. And it also should be mentioned that while I am putting a lot of blame on the offensive line, they are not the only guys to blame here. I'm kind of excusing Josh Rosen to a degree on a lot of these sacks, but at the same time, he made his own mistakes. I can't sit here and just say, you know what, Josh Rosen has nothing to blame for these poor performances. Josh Rosen just needs to play better as well. I mean, he's looking like he's an inexperienced guy out there, which he obviously is, but he's just not looking great out there. Granted, he's in an absolutely terrible situation, but he's made some mistakes, and like this one's a good example of it. So the way this play is going to work is it's going to be a bubble slant concept. And so the way it happens is that first it's going to be a play action. Sometimes you will see this with an RPO, but that doesn't appear to be the case. It appears that this is just going to be straight up play action. The idea behind this is actually relatively simple, but here's what you're supposed to do. Essentially, if it's going to be man coverage, then what you want to do is hit the receiver who's running the slant route. So the receiver who's cutting just past the 30, that's the receiver you'd want to hit. The one that's lined up closest to the sideline, essentially, on the top half of the screen. However, if it's zone coverage, then you can simply just hit the guy who's underneath, and that'll be the guy who's the most open and can gain the most amount of yards. So that's the way this play is supposed to work. And after this ball is snapped, it's clearly man coverage. I mean, as you see, just even if you know nothing about football, you can probably tell it's man coverage just simply because there's one redskin on each of those guys. And Rosen probably even knew this was man coverage beforehand, but that doesn't really matter. The point is, look at the guy who he would probably want to throw it to then. It would be the Dolphin, who's right on the 30-yard marker right here. But the problem is, he's not open. I mean, a Washington Redskin player did a very good job of reading this play and getting in the way, so Rosen just can't make this throw. At this point, Rosen just simply has 2 options. He can still hit the guy underneath to potentially gain some yards, that's something he could do, or he can just throw the ball away, or try to find some other secondary guy who could be open. But realistically, with your offensive line, you don't have too much time to look around, so I personally would just say throw the ball away at this point, or just, try to get the guy underneath, maybe he can break a tackle and gain some yards. However, Rosen tries to force this one anyways. It's just a young player mistake, and it ends up getting intercepted. It's just a play that he shouldn't have made. And just to be clear, I'm trying to not be too hard on this guy. I mean, clearly he's in a bad situation, and that is a type of mistake that plenty of second-year players will make, but at the same time, I do feel like he deserves some share of this blame. It's not like the rest of the team is bad and Rosen is just a great player playing in a terrible situation. That's not the case. He also isn't doing too much to help them. I still like Rosen's potential. Like, I wouldn't throw him away if I'm Miami, but there is a reason why they benched him besides the fact that he was just getting killed behind the line. He also just wasn't playing well. And I know people are going to say, Jackson, you're being way too hard on the Dolphins. I mean, they did nearly just win. Yeah, they're a bad team, but they're tanking. They're trying to be better in the future, so that's why they're not great right now. But they're not a disaster. However, I disagree. I kind of think they are a disaster. I think a lot of people looked at the score and said, hey, they almost came back, but a large part of that was just because Fitzpatrick was just throwing up shots that just happened to be caught. I mean, it's classic Fitzpatrick. He plays with total confidence, and sometimes it works out. Way more often than not, those types of plays are going to end up in interceptions, but you know what? Over the course of a half, it can actually give you a really positive benefit. That's how he has had so many good games and also so many disastrous games. Which, you know what, for a team like Miami, that's not a terrible thing. But I don't want you to get confused with the fact that they came close to winning a game to them actually being a good football team, because they absolutely are not. And plus, worth mentioning, it was also against another winless team at the time in the Washington Redskins. But let's talk about that two-point conversion try, which, personally, I think that these two-point conversion tries, when you're down just 1 point, have been getting a little bit overused. Like, I definitely think there are times where it makes sense. I think this time was one of those times where it makes sense, but I think sometimes you have all the momentum, you're a better football team, you're more of a defensive-first football team, and yet you'll still go for 2 down just 1 point, which I think is kind of silly. Overtime isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you gotta play for overtime. Again, that's kind of an unrelated tangent. I actually like the decision to go for 2 here, especially since you're not really trying to compete, so why not just end the game on 1 play? But anyways, let's talk about what went wrong here, where it's going to be a pick play, essentially. Those 2 receivers block those 2 Redskins right there, and then Kenyon Drake will run like that to try to just get into the end zone. That's the way this play is going to work. Some people were saying that they were trying to purposely run a bad play in this situation. I actually didn't see it that way. I don't hate this play. It worked out terribly, but I don't hate the play at all. These play concepts can work out, but look at how poorly executed it was. First off, there was just the simple fact that Kenyon Drake dropped the ball, which, okay, that's bad in its own way, but also worth mentioning, there's 2 Redskins who got completely free and were able to try to get into the way of Drake had he caught that ball. I'll start playing it back and forth so you can see it in real time, but what essentially happened was, first there was a Dolphin who just missed his block. One of the Dolphins receivers they kind of waited a little bit too long to make their block, which you do have to do since you can't get there too early. That's interference. You have to either make contact within 1 yard of the line of scrimmage or wait until the ball touches somebody before you can make your contact. And also a Redskins edge rusher was just very aware on that play, so that happened also. But as a whole, it was just a poorly executed play, and I really think that one play sums up the 2019 Miami Dolphins so far. I know I'm being hard on these guys, and I know a lot of you will say, man, Jackson, you must hate our team. I don't hate the Dolphins. I actually like the Dolphins. I live in Florida, I think the Dolphins are fun, but they're just not a good football team. They're not a well-coached football team. I'm not even sure if they're trying to be good. I'm actually pretty sure that they're not. Like with the Raiders last year, for example, I felt like, while they were clearly a bad team, they weren't trying to lose games. They were trying their best to win. They just weren't that talented. To me, I feel like the Dolphins, they genuinely don't care if they win or lose. They really don't. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what I feel. But at the same time, you have to believe they want to get a win. You have to believe they don't want to go 0-16. I mean, you never want to go 0-16. I remember as a Bucs fan watching all of our 0-7 starts, all of our 0-6 starts, we had quite a lot of those. My whole goal was always just, don't go 0-16. I know we've gone 0-14 in our past, but I feel like there's a difference between 0-16 and 0-14, so don't go 0-16. For Miami, I know they don't want to go 0-16. I know they would preferably like to go 1-15 and still get the number 1 overall pick, but unless they start playing a lot better fundamental football, I just don't see that happening.